Have you ever discovered something about your parents that made you question everything you thought you knew about your own life? For 40 years, he believed his father was a simple man. Quiet, predictable, ordinary, a man who went to work, came home, paid the bills, and sat in the same chair every evening as if the world outside their small house barely existed. His father was not dramatic, not emotional, not the kind of man who raised his voice or made big declarations. If anything, he seemed almost invisible in his own life. And for most of his childhood, that's exactly how he saw him. Just dad, nothing more, nothing less. But the truth? The truth had been locked away in a small metal box at the back of a closet waiting for the day someone would finally turn the key. It wasn't until after the funeral that he found it. The house felt wrong without his father in it. Too quiet, too hollow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Family photos still sat in their usual places. His father's jacket still hung on the back of a chair. The coffee mug he always used was still in the kitchen cabinet, handle turned to the side like it always was. Death moves fast. Life does not. So he did what children often do when a parent is gone. He started sorting through the pieces they left behind, hoping to understand a man he had never really asked about. In the bedroom closet, high on the top shelf, he found an old shoebox filled with receipts, faded birthday cards, and a watch that no longer ticked. Beneath that, half buried in dust, was something heavier, a small gray metal box with a keyhole in the center and deep scratches along the surface, as if it had been opened and closed many times, as if someone had held it tightly, again and again, unsure whether to keep it or throw it away. He picked it up. It felt heavier than it looked. On the lid, barely visible in the dim light, were 3 small letters scratched into the metal. J. W. H. His father's initials. There was no key in sight. He almost put it back, thinking it was probably full of old tools or broken things not worth keeping. But something about the weight of it, the way it seemed to buzz silently in his hands, made him pause. He took it to the kitchen table and sat in his father's chair. For a long moment, he just stared at it. It felt wrong to open it, and yet, it felt even worse not to. He checked drawers, small bowls, the top of the dresser, the inside of his father's desk. Eventually, in an old ceramic dish filled with spare buttons and screws, he found a tiny brass key. The metal was dull, but when he held it up to the box, it fit perfectly. His hands shook as he turned it. The lock clicked. The lid lifted with a soft metallic sigh, as if the box itself had been waiting a very long time for this. Inside, the first thing he saw was paper, neatly folded, stacked, some yellowed at the edges, some still crisp as if they had been handled carefully, frequently. There were no coins, no jewelry, no old photographs on top, just documents. He picked up the first one. It was a certificate, a marriage certificate. His eyes moved slowly, reading each line twice as his brain tried to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. Groom John William Harris. His father's full name. Bride Eleanor Grace Miller. He blinked. The name meant nothing to him. It wasn't his mother's name. The date at the bottom made his heart pound in his chest. 40 years ago. 3 years before his parents' wedding date. He checked again, thinking he must have misread it, that his grief was making him clumsy. Same name, same father, different bride, a marriage he had never heard of. He felt his throat tighten, a slow burning confusion rising like smoke. Was this a mistake? An error in the records? A joke? But his father was not a man who made jokes about marriage. He wasn't a man who made jokes at all. He set the certificate down and kept going. Beneath it were more papers, a mortgage document for a small house in another town, an hour away, a utility bill with the same last name Harris but a different first name, Eleanor, a hospital registration form for a birth. His breath caught. He ran his eyes over the page, each word sharp and heavy. Child male, father John William Harris, mother Eleanor Grace Harris. His hand went cold around the paper. Another child. Another life, another family. For a long time, he didn't move. The house seemed to tilt around him, the walls stretching and shrinking as if they too were trying to make room for this new, unbearable reality. His father had been someone else's father too. He thought of all the nights his father came home late from overtime, the unexplained trips, the weekends he said he had to help a friend out of town. He thought of his mother, always folding laundry, always saying, "Your father works hard. Don't give him a hard time." How much had she known? Had she known it all? His heart hammered against his ribs. Part of him wanted to put everything back in the box, close the lid, and pretend he had never opened it. Pretend his father was exactly who he had always believed he was. But once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. He dug deeper. At the bottom of the box, under a stack of medical forms and bank statements, there was a small envelope with his name written on it. Not in his mother's writing. In his father's. The letters were firm and careful, his name spelled out the way his father always wrote it on birthday cards. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The flap was sealed. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a letter. He unfolded it slowly, the paper soft from years of being handled and refolded. The ink had faded slightly, but his father's handwriting was still clear, steady. "Son, if you are reading this, then I am no longer there to answer your questions myself. There are things I should have told you long ago. I did not, because I was a coward. I hope you can at least understand, even if you cannot forgive me." His chest tightened. He could almost hear his father's voice and the words slow, measured, always careful. His father had never been good with emotions. He never said "I love you" easily. The most he usually managed was, "Drive safe," or "You need anything?" But here, on this page, there was a softness he had never heard from him in life. "I was married before I met your mother," the letter continued. "Her name was Eleanor. She was kind, bright, full of fire. We were young and thought love alone would solve everything. It did not." He swallowed. "I did not tell you about her, or about the son we had, because I was ashamed. Not of them. Of myself. I failed them both." The words seemed to blur for a moment as his eyes filled with tears. "I'd tried to be two men at once. I'd tried to be a good husband and father in two different homes. For a long time, I told myself I was doing it to keep everyone safe, to keep everyone provided for. The truth is, I was afraid to choose. And when you refuse to choose, life chooses for you, and not kindly." He stopped reading and stared at the table. His father had been living a double life. Not in some dramatic movie way, not with fast cars and secret hotel rooms, but in quiet drives, altered schedules, small lies told again and again until they became the structure of his days. He imagined his father on the road, hands on the steering wheel, driving from one town to another, switching rings in the car, practicing what to say and what not to say, dividing himself into pieces until there was almost nothing left. The letter went on. "I know you must be angry reading this. You have every right to be. Your mother did not deserve the pain my choices caused her. Neither did you. Neither did your brother." Brother. The word slammed into him with a force that made his head spin. Somewhere out there, all these years, there had been someone else carrying his father's last name. Someone who looked like him, maybe laughed like him, maybe disliked the same foods or loved the same music without ever knowing why. He read on, his hands gripping the edges of the paper. "I thought I could keep the two lives separate. I thought if I worked hard enough, I could make sure no one ever lacked for anything. But secrets are heavy, son. They weigh you down until you can't stand up straight anymore. It started to fall apart when your mother began asking questions I couldn't answer without hurting her. Eleanor was tired of being a secret. I was tired of lying. And yet, I kept doing it. Cowardice doesn't end on its own. It has to be confronted, and I never found the courage." He imagined his father, younger, torn between two front doors, two sets of keys, two dinner tables, two children waiting for him in two different towns. "I do not tell you this to ask for sympathy. I tell you because you deserve the truth. Your mother deserved more truth than I ever gave her. If you are angry with me, be angry. If you curse my name, I will not blame you. But there is something else you should know. I did not stop loving you when I drove away to that other town. I did not stop loving your brother when I drove back. Loving both of you was never the problem. The problem was that I refused to pay the price of honesty. He didn't realize he was crying until a tear dropped onto the paper, blurring one of the words. He wiped it quickly, as if that could erase the years that had already been lost. Near the end of the letter, the tone shifted. If you choose to look for him, I left what I could to help you. In the box, there should be an address, some documents, and a key. He has lived his entire life without knowing you exist. Or perhaps he has wondered. I do not know. But I have failed both of you long enough by keeping you apart. I do not deserve it, but if there is even a small part of you that can understand that a man can love deeply and still fail terribly, then maybe, one day, you will not let my mistakes become yours. I was a coward. Do not be. Your father, John. He sat there in his father's chair, the letter shaking in his hands. Coward. It was not a word he had ever associated with his father. Stubborn, quiet, distant, those, yes, but coward? No. Yet somehow, seeing it in his father's own writing, it fit in a way that hurt deeply. He read the letter again, slower this time. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, barely more than a whisper on the page, there was one final line. If I have any right left to ask you for something, please, if you can, don't let him live the rest of his life not knowing you exist. Him, his brother. The address was in the box, just like the letter said. A street he'd never heard of and a town he'd never visited. There was also a photocopy of that same marriage certificate, a handwritten note with a phone number, and an old photograph. He pulled the photograph out carefully. It was slightly faded, colors softened by time. In it, his father looked younger, shoulders straighter, hair still dark. Beside him stood a woman with bright eyes and a tired smile. Between them, about 8 or 9 years old, stood a boy. The boy had his father's eyes, and his smile, and something about the shape of his face, the angle of his jaw, made the world tilt again. They looked like family, his family. He pressed the photo to the table and leaned over it, staring so hard his eyes burned. Where was that boy now? Did he know his father had died? Did he know he existed? Did he grow up thinking his father had abandoned him? Or did he grow up thinking his father was fully his, never imagining there was another son in another town, blowing out candles on a cake in another kitchen, waiting for the same man to come home? Questions swarmed around him like bees, relentless, stinging. Eventually, he picked up the address. He turned it over in his hands. He could burn it, throw it away, close the box, tell himself that his father's sins would be buried with him. But the image of his father's handwriting wouldn't leave his mind. Don't let him live the rest of his life not knowing you exist. He heard his father's voice saying it, older, weaker, like it had sounded in those final days in the hospital when breathing itself seemed like effort. His father had asked for very little in life. He had never demanded loyalty, never insisted on his word being final, never tried to shape his son into someone else. In some ways, that had always frustrated him. It felt like his father was so distant, so uninvolved. Now he saw it differently. Maybe distance had been his father's way of punishing himself, or of not getting too close, in case the truth ever slipped out. He sat there until the light outside the window began to turn gold and then gray. Shadows stretched across the floor, stretching his father's empty chair into something long and thin. Finally, he folded the letter back along its worn creases and placed it gently in his pocket. The photograph, too. He left the rest in the box, closed the lid, and locked it again. Not to hide it, but to keep it safe. The next morning, he drove. The highway hummed beneath the tires as miles of unfamiliar landscape rolled past his window. He wondered if his father had driven this same road, hands on the same steering wheel, eyes on the same horizon, heart heavy with the weight of two lives that never should have overlapped. As he exited into a smaller town, the streets grew narrower, quieter. Old houses, tall trees, porches with worn steps. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets might linger in the air but seldom stayed hidden forever. He parked in front of a small, weathered house with peeling paint and a tidy yard. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. For a moment, he thought he might just sit there and then drive away. He could still pretend. He could still choose not to know. But then he saw his own reflection in the rearview mirror, and for just a second, he thought he saw his father instead. I was a coward. Do not be. He exhaled slowly, opened the car door, and stepped out. Each step up the walkway felt heavier than the last. He knocked. The sound echoed in the small porch area and then faded. For a moment, there was nothing. Then footsteps approached, slow but steady. The door opened. An older woman stood there, gray hair pulled back, lines of worry and time etched around her mouth and eyes. She squinted at him, then froze. Her hand moved to the side of the doorframe, gripping it as if she needed help to stay standing. You look just like him," she whispered. Her voice trembled on the last word. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. His throat felt dry. I'm John's son," he managed finally. "From the other town." Her eyes closed. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she opened them again, they were wet. "He always said this day might come," she murmured. "I just didn't think it actually would." She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. The furniture was simple, worn but clean. On a shelf in the living room, he saw a familiar face staring back at him from a framed photograph. His father, younger, standing beside the same boy from the old picture he had found. His chest tightened. "He died," the woman said softly from behind him. "Didn't he?" He nodded. "Yes." She sank slowly into an armchair, her shoulders drooping under the weight of something that had clearly been there for years. "I'm Eleanor," she said, "though I don't know if he ever said my name out loud in your house." He sat across from her, hands clasped together so tightly his fingers hurt. He said he failed you," he said quietly. "Both of you." She let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sob at the same time. "Yes," she said, "he did. But he also tried, in his way. Sometimes trying and failing hurts worse than not trying at all." He didn't know what to say to that. She studied his face. "You have his eyes," she said, "and his way of thinking too much before you speak. My son has that too." His heart skipped. "Your son," he said. Your brother," she finished for him. "Yes." The word hung in the air, real and impossible all at once. "He's not here right now," she said. "He lives a few hours away. But he comes to visit sometimes. And every time he does, he asks the same question." She looked down at her hands. "He asks if your father ever talked about him with his other family." His stomach twisted. "What did you say?" he asked. She looked up, and there was a sharpness in her gaze now, a tired anger that had never fully gone away. "I told him the truth," she said, "that I didn't know. Because your father never told me anything about your mother, or about you, until it was too late to change what had already been broken." Silence settled between them, thick and complicated. "He left you a letter too," she said finally. "He gave it to me years ago and said, if he ever comes, give him this. I kept it in the dresser. Some part of me thought you'd never show up. Some part of me hoped you would." She stood slowly and disappeared down the hallway. When she returned, she was holding a smaller envelope, worn at the edges, his name written on the front in the same familiar handwriting. Not just son, his full first name. Apparently, his father had known exactly who he hoped would find it. She held it out to him. "He wanted you to know everything," she said quietly. "Not just the parts that made him look good." He took it with both hands, the paper warm from hers. For a moment, he just held it, feeling the weight of it, the years packed tightly into something so small. His entire life, his father had been a quiet, distant figure in the background, reliable, predictable, uncomplicated. Now, sitting in the living room of a woman who had once shared his last name, holding a letter written for him by a man who had loved two families and broken both, he realized something he wasn't sure he was ready to admit. He hadn't known his father at all. He looked at the envelope, at his own name, at the life that was about to be split into before and after. If you want to support this story, Please consider subscribing and liking the channel. This is Life Studio.